The Union attack on the morning of September 17th was an echelon attack, moving from right to left. It began early in the morning with Hooker's 1st Corps attack on the far right of the Union line. Next came Mansfield's 12th Corps. And then finally, the attack by Major General Edwin Sumner's 2nd Corps. Sumner had 3 divisions under his command. In the lead was John Sedgwick, whose division veered off to the west and attacked into the West Woods. Now, there's a great deal of confusion to this day about what Sumner's intentions with his corps were and whether or not the other divisions attacked as they were intended. It seems as though the division of Brigadier General William French was supposed to follow in support of Sedgwick, but that's not what happened. It was one of the many times on this battlefield that there seems to have been a real breakdown in command and control, especially on the Union side. Sumner's other 2 divisions ended up instead turning toward the south, toward an area known to the locals as the Sunken Road. That's where I'm standing now. By the end of the day, it would forever be known as Bloody Lane. Defending the Sunken Lane that day was a division under D.H. Hill, men from Alabama on the left and men from North Carolina on the right. Really, the battle here in and of itself could be a series of videos, but there's a lot to cover, and so I'm sharing with you the Union perspective. And my friend JD from the History Underground is going to give you the Confederate perspective. So I'll put a link in the description. Check out his channel for all of the amazing content from the Antietam battlefield, but especially to get the perspective of what was happening on the Confederate side here at the Bloody Lane. French's attack came in 3 waves, with the German-born Brigadier General Max Weber's brigade in the lead, followed by the brigades of Colonel Dwight Morris and Brigadier General Nathan Kimball. Now, it's important to note that of the 10 regiments in French's division, only 3 had any previous battle experience. A few of them had just joined the army within the last few weeks. They were still learning to load their rifles, learning to march in order. Weber's brigade, from left to right, was the 1st Delaware, the 5th Maryland, and the 4th New York. They waded through waist-deep water and crossing the Antietam Creek at around 7:30 a.m., but it was nearly 9 o'clock before they were in position to launch the attack. Part of that delay was caused by a lack of ammunition. You see, the men of the 5th Maryland carried Austrian Lorenz rifles, which were of a different caliber than the weapons carried by the other regiments of the brigade. And so there was a holdup while they found the proper ammunition. Eventually, each man was issued 80 rounds of ammunition, and the brigade moved forward. Weber ordered the color bearer of the 5th Maryland, who was described as a heavy-built German man of over 6 feet and weighing nearly 300 pounds. He ordered him to aim for the William Roulette home and guide the men in that direction. So I want to give you a sense of what this attack was like from the Union perspective. We are about 120 yards from the Sunken Lane. You can't see it at all. You can barely see the top of a monument there on the hill to members of the Maryland regiment that attacked here. But as we come around this corner, we're going to start walking toward the Sunken Lane up this hill. This is what the men of the Union would have seen. Keep in mind, though, they're not under any small arms fire at this point. They are under Confederate artillery fire. which is already inflicting some casualties. But at this point, they're very near to the Sunken Lane, and you still can't see anything. You're starting now to see the very top of the Alabamians line, but just a small part of it. Certainly wouldn't have been able to return fire from here. But it's only when we get up to this monument that you're finally in position to start firing on the Confederates, who are in basically a makeshift trench. And as they came up over this hill, Rhodes's men would have unleashed hell on the men of Maryland. Now, Weber's brigade, though it was the lead brigade in a three-pronged attack by French, the other brigades began to shift a little further to the east. And so there was a bit of overlap, but Weber's brigade would have extended down the hill in this direction. And then you would have had the other two brigades of French's division coming in, kind of overlapping maybe a third, but moving in further and further down at the Sunken Lane from this direction, but likewise cresting a hill on that side where there's a cornfield today, and just coming under murderous fire as soon as they got to the top of that hill. This spot at the crest of the hill is as far as the leading waves of the Union infantry got. Next, it was going to be up to Israel Richardson and his division, which would be coming in behind, but also a bit further to the left of French's men. This field in front of me might be the very best spot in order to understand and visualize the Union attack on Bloody Lane. To my left down this road is the Mumma farm. The Roulette farm is right there. And now in this field in front of me, you can see we're basically looking down the long axis of the Union advance. So just in this field right here in front of me would have been where French's division was marching across. It's a nice wide open field. I don't believe these trees were here at the time. It was all open all the way to the Sunken Lane, which you can just see in the distance. You can see the fence there for what we know as Bloody Lane. In the far field then would have been an hour later where Richardson's division would have come in. And so you can just imagine this mass of blue, 5,000 men from the 1st Division coming through right here, the other division then coming through later, another 5,000 men. Just keeping them organized under intense artillery fire would have been difficult because these are men, most of them brand new recruits. Many of them only have been in the Army a couple of weeks. They're still learning how to do this stuff, and they've got to do it in open field, under fire, attacking one of the strongest defensive positions on the battlefield. As French's division was launching their attack on the Bloody Lane, his follow-up attack under command of Israel Richardson was just fording the Antietam Creek and moving into position. As French began to fall back and he was trying to hang on and hold the Confederates' attention, Richardson's attack commenced here on the right side of the Confederate line at the Bloody Lane. The attack came in the form of Thomas Maher's Irish Brigade. It wasn't completely Irish. It was made up of 3 New York City regiments that were Irish. Also a 29th Massachusetts, which probably had some Irish, but wasn't distinctly Irish like the other units were. That brigade would go on to experience some of the worst fighting on the worst battlefields at places like Marye's Heights, at Fredericksburg, and in the wheat field at Gettysburg. But on this day, they attacked in force and got within about 30 yards of the Confederate line where volleys were being exchanged. But eventually, like many of the other units, they just weren't able to push through. Eventually, Caldwell's brigade came up to relieve them when they got low on ammunition. Initially, Caldwell's brigade, which was following behind the brigade of Thomas Maher, was coming around on the far left of Richardson's division, and they were going to put enfilading fire into Anderson's division here at Bloody Lane. But they eventually found themselves shifting further back and actually coming in behind Maher's brigade. There were, however, elements of Caldwell's brigade that did start to fire into the Confederates down the long axis of Bloody Lane. And there was one soldier in Caldwell's brigade that described how devastating their fire was on the Confederates. He said that it was really hard to miss at that distance and with so many soldiers. I mean, when you're firing into the flanks, if you miss the first guy, you might hit the second or the third. And he even described how some of the bullets would hit the side of the lane and ricochet into a soldier, and that soldier would go down. Eventually, as JD, I'm sure, will explain in his video from the Confederate perspective, something happened. And of course, the Union didn't know exactly what had happened, but something happened, and the Confederates, who had been holding their position until then, suddenly started to fall back and abandoned their positions on the Bloody Lane. They moved back over the next hillside onto the Piper farm, but they did manage to reform and launch a counterattack, but they were never again able to retake the position here at the Bloody Lane. In the aftermath, some of the most horrific scenes of the American Civil War were photographed. Due to the proximity to Washington, D.C., there were a number of photographers who came here to the battlefield in the days afterwards. And by the time they arrived, quite a bit of the Union dead had been buried, but many of the Confederates remained where they were killed. And that included here in the Bloody Lane. And won't include those photographs in this particular episode. I have a later episode where we'll talk more about the aftermath of the battle. But you can see the carnage here. You can see the heaps of Confederate bodies lying in this place where they fell. Gives you a sense, a little sense of what happened here, but we can never, I think, fully grasp just how horrific this place must have been on September 17th, 1862.